Hey guys, welcome to SideQuestions, a show in which I'm going to try to wax intellectual about some pseudo-philosophical questions as they relate to role-playing games. I've been kicking around this idea for a while about this show, and so I'm just going to try to do this off the top of my head. Today's topic is RPGs. What makes a game a role-playing game? And I realize that as somebody whose channel name is SuperDerek RPGs, that's kind of a weird thing for me to be asking at this point, isn't it? What is a role-playing game? I mean, at first you would think, sure, it's just a game in which you take on the role of a character. But that could really relate to anything, and I often joke that given the broadest definition of role-playing game, any game could be considered a role-playing game, even Quest 64. And while that is just a joke that I throw around, it is kind of true. Pretty much anything could be a role-playing game by that definition. So I tried to make a brainstorm, a list of things that make an RPG. You know, you've got, obviously the story and narrative. Let's see, I'm actually just going to read off this list a little bit. Adventure, self-actualization, character stats, that turn-based battle system. This list went on for a while as I was trying to brainstorm this topic, and I realized that what I was describing, what I was writing out, were things that RPGs had, but not necessarily things that RPGs were. So I decided to shift gears. Some games are more RPGs than others. You could kind of describe it like a spectrum. So I tried to define the very far side of the spectrum. What is the most role-playing thing, the most quintessential role-playing you can come up with? And the most far thing I could think of is LARPing, live-action role-play, which isn't a video game. It is something that you do with people, hopefully, in which you might do some sword fighting, you act out a character in groups. It's kind of like a Renaissance festival, but like further to that end. It's taken pretty seriously in some instances. A step away from LARPing is finally it's tabletop games. Still not a video game, but a tabletop RPG. You got your Dungeons and Dragons and various spin-offs of that, in which you create a character in your mind and you act it out with your friends, and you go on adventures together and you take on the role of the character. Some people even speak on behalf of the character. They act out said character, and that is pretty well to the side of role-playing as well. And then we finally get to RPGs. Which I've decided to split into various states of RPG-ness. The very far... Sorry, microphone. The very far end of the role-playing game spectrum, I feel, is that of Western RPGs, in that they're most closely related to tabletops. They are more focused on self-actualization within the game. And then you have JRPGs, in which you are less about affecting the world and more so about experiencing the world and the story that it presents to you. And then a step further down that spectrum is action RPGs, in which your story becomes less about like a group of people and more about a single person. So the scope of the tale kind of narrows a bit, and you are given less time to think about the motivations of the characters. Often the story takes a slight backseat to the action, and then you go into the action-adventure side of things, which is more like your Zeldas, which is very, very loosely roleplay-ish. You're at that point really just solving puzzles, fighting monsters, going from point A to point B, trying to advance the story that might be there, but it's not really the focus. of the gameplay. So I feel like that's kind of the spectrum up to that point, and then beyond that, maybe adventure, and then everything else. Or maybe adventure games are somewhere else within that spectrum, I don't know. But I feel like there's still something that we're missing here. There's a game out there, some people have probably heard of, called Call of Duty, in which you shoot people with guns and then you go up levels. And there's another famous game out there called Fallout, in which you shoot people with guns and go up levels. They're both first-person titles, and there's a separation between these two, obviously. One is clearly an RPG, and then the other is Call of Duty. There's a separating line there, and it's hard to nail down where exactly that lies, but I believe that one of the big dividers here is what motivates people to play them. Why do you choose to play Call of Duty? Why do you choose to play Fallout 3? And I feel like that's a really big part of the puzzle here. The motivating factors. You play Call of Duty because you want to do, 360 no-scopes and drink Mountain Dew. And you play Fallout 3 because you want to explore the world and experience a story and craft a character. And it's still hard to nail down, but there is definitely a thing that separates these lines. Are RPGs, in a sense, like pornography in that you know it when you see it? I've been choosing games to review on my channel based on the idea that I'll just know what fits. And up to this point, I feel like that's worked pretty well. There have been a few outliers. Mystical Ninja Goemon is kind of on that outer edge, so was Shenmue, but those are kind of earlier into my channel where I wasn't so well defined in my decision to play RPGs exclusively. But I would still like to play other games like those in the future, including Shenmue 2. So I feel like it kind of works, but not really. But maybe you can judge an RPG by the ways in which it might fail. There are some unique ways that RPGs are capable of failing in ways that other games wouldn't fail. Like, people would think a Fallout game was a bad game if it didn't have a very strong story, whereas Call of Duty, I don't think would get a whole lot of flack for just having, a very limited story. But then I stumbled upon this thought. Lack of a quantifiable difference in character growth and lack of a metaphysical character growth are two signs of an RPG that wasn't very effective at what it was trying to do. I feel like if your character at the end of a game is the same as the character was at the beginning of the game, that is a very unique way in which an RPG can fail. And what I mean by this is that at the beginning of Super Mario Bros., you are Mario. Mario doesn't go through trials and tribulations. He doesn't grow as a character from game to game. He doesn't gain stats. He is the same sprite at the end of the game as he was at the beginning of the game. He has the same weaknesses. He has the same strengths. He does not grow as a character in Super Mario Bros. 1, at least. But every RPG ought to have that sort of growth. And similarly, if you as a player are the same as you were at the end of the game as you were at the beginning of the game, that is also a sign that the game failed to affect you in the way that an RPG ought to affect a person. So, those are my rambling musings as they relate to the topic of what makes a game an RPG. Earlier this week, I threw out a tweet on Twitter to find out what other people thought, and I got a lot of responses. So I'm going to read off a few. If I don't read yours, please don't hold it against me. I want to keep this video relatively short, so I am going to read off a few of these now. Brand Tankage writes, I think it needs to have experience. Do you gain experience from combat, something else within the game, gaining experience and growing stronger as a character? That's how I see it, is what he writes. And I tend to agree with that. I think we mentioned that a little bit earlier. Bearded Brendan also writes, I view it as a game where the mechanics focus on building a character through a game. In Western RPGs, that tends to be more through stats, where Japanese RPG, it tends to be more through story. Daniel Rail writes, I think that it's a combination of things, an open world and non-linear game with stat customization, leveling up, and fun characters. Lord Kaiser 00 writes, RPGs are games where your playable character grows stronger by an implemented incremental system. Level system is an example. Of course, this is a very broad statement and includes games like Borderlands that are considered first-person shooters or other stuff. Ryan Phoenix writes, one of the main factors that make a game an RPG is character growth. Your character isn't the same by the end of the game. And I feel like that's a really good point, and we also mentioned that as well. I also put out a note to some of my YouTube friends, and I wanted to get their opinions. Avalanche Reviews responded with a rudimentary stat system and a deep, involving story. I think these are two elements that make up every RPG. Johnny Millennium over from Happy Console Gamer writes, the sense of exploration and adventure. The idea of connecting with your character and becoming that character and gaining strength and being able to take on more challenges as the game goes on. Giving you a sense of accomplishment within a game world, like you made a difference and you had to be there. I think that's a really interesting point that Johnny brings up. In Western RPGs, you tend to make yourself a character into the game, but in Western RPGs, you put yourself in the character's shoes. It's kind of vice versa there. It's a neat point. Daria Plays wrote, asking whether a game falls under a specific genre is not a binary question. Sometimes the answer is a solid yes or no, but often is an uncertain maybe or kind of. Games are defined by a spectrum of common traits. Traditional turn-based games with explicit quests, stat gains, and experience points fall squarely into the center of the black of the RPG scale. But genre-bending first-person shooters with so-called RPG elements are outlier cases sprinkled along the pale gray boundaries of the common definition. And between those two extreme points exists thousands of games with varying degrees of RPG-ness. Guys, come on, get your head out of the gutter. Drawing lines across the system and declaring this is an RPG and this is not is both arbitrary and pointless. That was a mouthful. But I think she made some pretty good points here. It's very difficult to define exact points where the cutoff is, but I do think that you can still sort of define them based on this sort of exercise. Shane from Reres sent in a tape that I'll just play for you guys right here.
I personally feel that a role-playing game is all about the role of the main character, and you living out that role. I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that say for them an RPG is all about world exploring or maybe turn-based combat, but for me personally, that's never really been what those games are about. Whatever your character is, whether he be some renegade soldier or some distant prophet, exploring their story and whatever chunk of it you're set to live in that game is what the game is all about. Long, complex, interesting stories that pull you in and refuse to let you go. An RPG is a story first. And in many cases, the gameplay might not even be that important.
Thanks, Shane. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And Chutoy writes, to make a game an RPG, one would first need to attach said game to a rocket to propel it toward the target, then rig the rocket-propelled game to explode on impact, much like a grenade. And with that, everybody, I think we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and thank you for joining me. If you guys have any questions you would like me to try to tackle on Side Questions, feel free to tweet them to me at SuperDerek YT. And if you have any contributions you would like to make to these questions, keep an eye out for when I post these questions to my Twitter, and I will see you guys next time.